We are now in Koheles Ecclesiastes chapter 6, and he says the following. Yesh ro'o asher ra'isi tachas hasheves v'rabo hi al ha'adam. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is great upon men. Ish asher yiten lo ha'elokim osher nechosim v'kovod. Man whom God has given wealth and property and honor, and he is not missing anything. And God does not allow him to use it or to have it. He gathers it, but he never uses it. Like Art Raymond used to say, the Kinsler, the DJ, Jewish DJ on WVD, we should have health and wealth and time to enjoy them. So he gathers all this wealth, and he doesn't have time to enjoy them. Ki ish nachri yochleno. A stranger will have it. Zehevel b'choli barohu. It's sickness. People work all their lives, and they don't have a chance to enjoy what they have. Im yolid ishmeya b'shonim rabos. A man will give birth to 100 children and live many years. V'rav shiu yimei shana b'nafshelo sis b'minatova. If he doesn't have satisfaction from all the money he has and all the children he has, he has nothing but gam glura lo hoiselo, and he never is buried. Amarti told me meno anafal. I say it's better a man who was never born, someone who's never born. We're on 1180 in the back, all the way in the back, and you'll see it'll say Ecclesiastes Koheles there when you flip through until you get into that, and you'll see it in a moment. Ki b'hevel bo u'b'choshech yelech, because the person came. Okay, yeah. Ki 1180, chapter 6, the fourth passage. Ki b'hevel bo u'b'choshech yelech. He came in air, and in darkness he'll go away. U'b'choshech shmo yechuseh, and in darkness his name will be covered. In other words, nobody will remember him. No one will remember. A person is lost. Andy Warhol says, a person has 15 minutes of fame. So what King Solomon is talking about here is the whole concept of how a person works and works and works, and he doesn't have anything from it, and there's no purpose in what he's doing, and what all his work under the sun. What is it all about? What is he trying to do? What does he gain from it? Gam shemesh lo rov lo yoda nachas lo zeh mizeh. He never saw the sun and knew nothing. This has more rest than the other. The one who was never born in the first place, or the one who was born a miscarriage. Gam shemesh lo rov. Why? Because in miscarriage never saw the sun and knew nothing, but he has more rest than the human being who worked and got nothing out of it. Okay, yes?
I think there was some quote in Sophocles, one of his plays, the luckiest of those who were never born, and the next luckiest of those who died young. I mean, how much more tragic can you get from that?
Well, I mean, it's a very good point you're making, Barry. The idea here is that what do you have for your work? What nachas do you? You know, when I see that as a rabbi, very often people reach 65, 70, they've worked all their lives, and then they say, what do I have from it? And then all of a sudden they want to help the institution, they want to build, and they want to do something in the Torah world, and they want to have good things. But why now? Why all of a sudden now? Because a person sits back and he starts to get it, what am I doing this for? See, that's the illusion of progress. What progress have I made? That is the despair. And depression comes to people who have made lots of money as fast as it comes to people who have not. The Talmud said, the Pirkei says, Ezahu Asher, who is the wealthy person, Hasameach Bechelko, that person who is happy with what he has. In other words, with his portion. There are two names in Hebrew. Very interesting philosophically. Two names for a poor person. The first name for a poor person is an ani. he has less than Mosayim Zuz and a few $1,000s. He's worth, I don't know what you lawyers call a person who is indigent, is poor person. A person, a person who is poor. There's a certain level you can't make a certain amount of money. In Jewish law, you have that too. You have the oni. The person doesn't have a worth of a couple $1,000s or something like that. So that person is poor, but the poverty level. Then you have another name for a poor person, and that person is called an evyon. Is also a poor person, but the word evyon, in other words, we have it when we say the prayers before Rosh Hashanah, when we say slichos, ulai yachos am oni ve'evyon. Perhaps God will have mercy on a nation of oni ve'evyon, of poor and poor. Oni, it means poor on a certain level. Evyon is a different kind of poor. Evyon comes from the Hebrew word ava, I want something. So an evyon is someone who constantly wants. So he's called poor. He never has enough. What? That's right. So that person is called an evyon. That person is called someone who is not happy, is not satisfied with it. What? I remember years ago, when I just got out of college, they said that over half or 60% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies harbored deep feelings of insecurity. It's tremendous insecure. Well, why? If you have made it, why do you feel insecure? But sometimes there are people who are evyon who never had a time to enjoy it, and whatever they have in life, it does not make them happy, because happiness is a state of mind. It's not a state of and that sounds like a cliche, but the fact of the matter is, it's a state of mind. We'll continue. And if this person would have lived 1,000 years twice, 2,000 years, and he never saw any good, right? Doesn't everything go to one place? And if everything goes to one place, so what good is it? I mean, he has no done any more. If he never saw good, or if he never thought he had good in his life, if he never was satisfied, what difference does it make how long he's lived? What difference does it make what he's had and what he's done? Ki ma yoseh lachacham min aksil, melo oni yodea lahaloch neged chayim. For what has a wise man more than a fool? What has the poor that knows to walk before the living? All right. He's saying here, what does a wise person have more? What does the poor person know about life? In other words, the more you know about the realities of life, the more pain you're going to have, as opposed to a poor person who doesn't know anything, and his ignorance is bliss. Tov mari einayim mehaloch nafesh. Better is what one sees with the eyes and the wandering of desire. Gamze hevel urus ruach. In other words, he's saying here, if you're happy with what you have in front of you, you're much better off than if you always want more and more and more. That which has been is already called by its name, and it is known as man. And he's not able to contend with him that is mightier than he. What does that mean? That can either be his desires, in other words, he can't contend with his own inner self. For there are many things that increase stupidity and vanity. What advantage is it for a man? For who knows what is good for a man in this life, the number of his days of his vain life. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? In other words, he's always going to be asking himself, what do my actions lead to? What do my act? Where am I going? What is this for? Koheles is trying to tell us here that there's absolutely no way one can possibly want everything, because you don't know where. You have to live for the now to a certain extent. You can't always be worrying about the future. If you want to worry about the future, you can buy every kind of insurance in the world. You can do this and do that, and you're still vulnerable. What is the term that you lawyers use? What is my exposure, right? Well, the fact of the matter is that everybody has exposure, and there's no way you can get out of exposure. It's there. It's there. So you have to sometimes, instead of wander and go for other things, you have to say, be sameach b'chelkecha, be happy with what you have. And now he says he's going to really attack the materialists of life in Zion, famous one. Tov shem mishemen tov. A good name is better than good oil. Shem means name in Hebrew, shemen means oil. Tov shem mishemen tov. Better to have a good name than good oil. Better to people respect you than just to be a lout with a lot of money. V'yom hamaves miyom hiboldo, and the day of death is better than the day you were born. Now that sounds suicidal, but he's talking. That's why I say that you have to see this on a Kabbalistic level. Otherwise, it's impossible. Because V'yom hamaves, the day of death is better than the day of being born, is because that's the time when you have finished with this foolish earth, and you go back on a Kabbalistic level. You go back to the ultimate spirituality of God. But this can be interpreted as very depressing, because we see it the other way. This is the famous one. Tov laleches el beis evel mileches el beis mishtet. It is better to go to a house of mourning, mourning, mileches el beis mishtet, than to go to a house of a party. Basher hu sof kol adam, that is the end of all man. And the living person should think about this when he goes. He says, look, this is where the end of me. Now, on a simple level, this is the way it's translated in the fear talk. It is better if you go to a mourner's house, there you will see what all the foolishness of life. I don't think he means that. I think he means that you get the perspective. You get the perspective, the perspective of life. When you go to an Ovel's house, when you go to a mourner's house, what you're seeing, the negativity will cause you to have simcha. I talked about this, zelu umazev, bouncing back and forth. People who, if you are in such a state where you go to a house of mourning, then the balance will cause you to seek joy and to get balance in your life. In other words, if you go to a house of rejoicing, what do they say that happens around all the holiday times? Is terrible depression. That's because of balance, because of the zelu umazev. If you want to have it this way and you expose yourself to this, then the sitra achra, the other side, will balance it the other way. When you go to a house of mourning, you will come out. I've always said that I noticed, and rabbis sometimes notice, and ministers sometimes notice, in general, that when they do a funeral afterwards, the world seems brighter, and the food tastes better, and everybody is more, it looks better to them. And why is that? Because of the fact that the balance to express life is there. You've seen the other side. You've seen the negative aspect. So sometimes that's on one level, and even on a higher level, the understanding of this is that you will begin to understand that in a mourner's house, on a Kabbalistic level, there is a certain how shall I say it? There is a certain realization that one day all of the negativity of this world is over. That's another concept that I think is important for us to understand here. Any questions, comments, or anything?
As that at the last part of that number, he says, and let the living lay it to his heart. So are they then in the house of mourning? Someone saying, look where we're all going to go out and do something meaningful while you have time. Is that what
that's one explanation? And in other words, I better get it done now because it's not going to be.
Next.
Yeah, I could be next. That's That's the one I got when I was in the yeshiva. Hacha yiten libo. You know, from the old European philosophy. But I see it the other way. Hacha yiten libo is you see that there's an end to the tribulations of this world, and that the word for death in Hebrew is ptira, which means freedom. So we're an interesting people. We don't want to think Kabbalistically for a lot of things, but when it comes to death, we think Kabbalistically. We said niftar, free. Free from the and the responsibility of the test. Now, I'm not trying to give a negative concept here. I'm trying to give a positive concept. Any comments or thoughts? Okay. We'll continue. Tov kas mischok. It is better anger than laughing. Ki baruah ponim yitav lev. For through the sadness of the heart, for the sadness of a face or an angry face, yitav lev, the heart will be better.
The idea that we're here to struggle, and if there's laughter, there's really no struggle going on.
Yeah, right. But again, that can be taken to the point where one says, well, it's better to be a masochist. He's saying, when he's saying it's better, doesn't mean that it's a mitzvah to do it. It's better for you in the long run to go through a Marine Corps thing. If someone's tough on you, it makes your heart better. The heart is better for it.
Vexation. I don't think that's anger. Vexation is something. It's a conflict. Something
but the word
eating away. You
never heard the expression kas in Hebrew? Kas means anger. You know it from the Hebrew because it's part of the Yiddish. I don't know why the King James translated to be vexed. But basically, kas means kas. Kas means anger. All right. It says in. It says in Pirkei Avos, "Shnoas harabbanos," hate the rabbinate. All right, so don't get involved in the rabbinate. So one graduate rabbinical student asked an old rabbi, "This doesn't mean a rabbi. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be a rabbi. It means rabbanos means authority. Probably comes from the word authority because it means rab means great, so it means power, authority. So he hadn't been in the rabbinate for long, and this rabbi had been through all the tribulations of being a rabbi for all the years and all the things and all the narishkeit as well as good. He says it doesn't mean hate a rabbin probably means authority, doesn't it? So the old rabbi looked at him and he said, Rabbonis meant Rabbonis, which means the rabbinate means the rabbinate. Don't try to translate it what it's not. But the fact is that there's much more to it than that. But the idea here is that that sometimes toughness in life helps you out. All right. Leiv chachomim bebeis Evel. The heart of the wise people are in the mourner's house. Leiv chsilim bebeis simcha. And the heart of fools is in a house of rejoicing. Now, let me explain to you what that means, okay? Leiv chachomim bebeis Evel means because in a house of a mourner, you begin to see the perspective of life. And you begin to see this man lived or this woman lived, and what did she accomplish? You begin to get a perspective of life. What Koheles sees, what is rejoicing, what is living it up. Koheles would see that as a drug of life, as a sort of opiate of the masses. Go live it up. So what? I mean, what is that why you're here? Is that your purpose? Of course you have to have some. One moment he seems to say you have to appreciate what you have, and the next moment he seems to contradict himself and say, well, why are you going to live it up? But what he's saying is there has to be a middle ground. What he's saying is you have to appreciate what you have, but you don't go to the point where you go totally overboard. So if you're going to, what is the difference between sitting up and going to a rock session and jumping up and down and having a party, or injecting yourself chemically to get the same high? He doesn't see a difference in that. He sees the wise person can look at a situation and see it for what it is. What does a doctor do? What does a lawyer do? A doctor, some of us can't stand blood, so we're emotionally thrown away from that. The doctor can look from a larger perspective and see blood, and he's sure it's hard. He works with cadavers, and sure it is, but he gives them a perspective about survival in the physical world and how to do it. An attorney sometimes too some people will see something frightening. An attorney looks at it from a broader perspective. So that's why he says that. Any comments, questions, anything? Okay. Leiv chachamim, the heart of the wise people of Beis Evel, is in a house of mourning. Belev ksilim b'vei simcha. The heart of a fool is in a house of rejoicing. Tov lishmoa garas chacham me'ish shomeach shir ksilim. It is better to hear the anger or the rebuke of a wise person than a man who should hear the song of fools. Len?
I think just interesting from the way he pairs up wise and mourning and fools and joy. He's really talking about wisdom and foolishness. He's not really talking about house of mourning and house of joy. I mean, he's trying to explain where you're going to get wisdom from and who are the fools, rather than saying walking into a happy house, you're going to be dealing with fools, because that's not really true.
No. So your point is basically what?
That he's trying to explain where you're going to find wisdom, not that a joyful house is filled with fools.
Right, exactly. No, you can have. Right. Well, he's using extreme examples to bring. In other words, he's trying to shock you. What do you mean by that? Saying you don't go to house? He's using shock value here. There's no question.
He has pushed the extreme. The worst extreme is, most depressing is, someone died and you're standing next to a body. And the other extreme is, there's a wild party, they're all drunk. I don't know if they used drugs in those days, but maybe the women available. And so he would think that's foolish. As the other one is the extreme, it can't get any worse. He's dead.
It still sounds awful to be
Well, he meant that a house of the extreme joy, where they're all running around trying to get as much pleasure out of your body, is foolish.
He's saying, and I'll tell you, I did not look in some of the commentaries because I want to take it in from what he's saying, and then because the commentaries go along their particular line, and that's their line that they go, that they follow. But the fact is that what you're dealing with is he's trying to say that you get wisdom and you get understanding from places that you don't really think you'd ever get them from, and you can take things out of. In other words, what you think is good is not going to necessarily wind up good, and what you think is bad is not necessarily what you're going to wind up as bad.
Be joyful won't bring you any deep thoughts, but going to the cemetery will.
That's another way of looking at it. It's a multi-layered thing, but I mean, again, we have to resist the temptation to think that this is just a bummer. All right. Kikol hasirim tachat hasir, for as the crackling of thorns under a pot. All right. Kain schok haksil. So is the laughter of the fool. V'gam zehevel. This is foolish as well. What would happen also, and I think my own particular philosophy here is that wild parties were the way that the idolaters, I think my Koheles would get people to worship idols, etc. What would happen is the people would get so wild and so drunk that they would violate other people's lives and violate their moralities of other people. The idea behind it was that lo abdu avosenu avodas elilim elokadei lahatarayis, that the idea of idolatry was only to get you to a point where you could steal somebody else's made, that particular kind of situation. So that kind of situation was one in which they worried about too wild a party. In other words, there came a certain Pavlovian relationship. The dog and the salivation. I'm not going to go into that, except to say that people, what happened, and especially happened with the golden calf, was people got so worked up and frenzied up into the idolatry, into the party beforehand, that through the idolatry that this led to that. So people weren't seeing the idol, they were seeing what would happen at the party for the idol. So that became the Pavlovian.
It's really a modern idea of the word joy, which is more of an innocent connotation today. It's real, yeah.
It's bacchanalian. Exactly. That was what he was talking about, and the danger of that kind of most politicians, most people of power, are not brought down by not being able to face up to a challenge, a classic challenge. They're brought down by little things that happen when they're off guard. Understand what I'm saying? This is what happens. This is how you get it. That's how God tests a person on his weak spot. King David is not afraid of Goliath, but Bathsheba causes him problems. What? He certainly didn't, because the prophet Nathan really gave him what for. But as a matter of fact, it's very interesting that Mordechai, one of the most interesting things, the holiday of Purim, the whole concept is b'nahapachu, the opposite, the whole concept of the opposites. That's also an interesting concept in Kabbalah. One of the things that people are shocked at when they come into a rabbinical seminary, which is one of the most politically correct atmospheres you can find. You make a step to the left or right, you're out. Your whole life is scrutinized, etc. Comes Purim. They did a Purim spiel. They do a Purim spiel. It's a Purim play where they make ridicule some idiosyncrasies of one of the rabbis of the seminary, etc. They may do this, and people say, how all of a sudden on Purim you allow these plays to make, what do you call that kind of play, which is a satire. You do a satire on various things. How do they allow that? The idea behind Purim is to make fun of power, make fun of the danger of power, of the good times. Mordechai, Esther comes from Saul, and Esther's test was she was quiet. Esther means hidden. She's part of Purim. She means hidden. And so how does Esther have to save her people? She has to go to the king. She has to go publicly. That's not her style. That's not her thing. So she's tested on her weak point, just as Moses, who was the man of action, was told, speak to the rock, do what Aaron did. I talked about this before, didn't I? Aaron, who was the talker, was tested to see if he would stop the people from idolatry right away. So Esther was tested on her weak point too, and her weak point was whether or not she's quiet. She comes from Benjamin. She's a quiet person. How could she? She's a hidden person. She has to go publicly to the king. That's not her strong point. Mordechai is probably the most interesting of all characters. Mordechai is the most interesting. That's the whole concept of b'nahapachu, turning around, upside down. That's what Purim is about. Mordechai is a character who every school child knows faces Haman, and everybody's bowing down to Haman. You know the story of Purim. Mordechai doesn't bow down. What nerve, what guts, okay? But no, I don't bow down. There's no way you're going to get me to do that. So Mordechai goes on to his strong point, and he's tested on his strong point. He's gutsy. But what happens when Mordechai is made prime minister? It says, Mordechai, the Jew, was second to King Ahasuerus and great among the Jews and acceptable to most of his brothers. So the commentary Rashi says most of his brothers he was acceptable to, but not all of his brothers, because he became so close to the king's inner circle that he stopped his studying. And the Sanhedrin said, Mordechai is a rabbi, he's no longer studying as much as he used to. He's too involved in politics, even to save the Jews and build a temple. They moved away from him. Separated. They thought he lost his purity. Now it's very interesting that one is supposed to drink on Purim until one does not know the difference between cursed Haman and blessed Mordechai, Or Haman and Baruch Mordechai. It's a very interesting concept. You know what's interesting about it? What? Well, is it? It seems like now you'll appreciate this. We say nichnas yain yatsa sod. When in goes the wine, out comes the secrets. Now, one concept of this is, when you get a little drunk, you tell everybody all your business. I say something else. I think from Kabbalistic point of view, I've always said nichnas yain yatsa sod means when the wine comes out, you see the truth. You see the secrets. All of your illusions are about yourself, and your delusions. What Henry Kissinger used to describe someone. He has a high capacity for delusion, or for self-delusion. He has a high capacity for self-delusion. So when you drink, sometimes, and I'm not a proponent of drinking. Okay, I think becoming intoxicated is a very dangerous thing to do. But the fact is, sometimes when someone drinks, not only does his secret comes out, but people get depressed sometimes when they drink because they see what they really are. All their delusions are and their illusions are broken. So you want to know, you know the story of Or Haman and Baruch Mordechai. One has to drink so much he doesn't know the difference between cursed Haman and blessed Mordechai on a Kabbalistic level, using gematria. You know what gematria is? Numerical values. It's fascinating. Aleph is 1, right, etc., etc. The Hebrew letters have numerical values. Okay. If you count up, if I remember off the top of my head, Or Haman, which means cursed Haman, and Baruch Mordechai, blessed Mordechai, Or Haman is 512, and Baruch Mordechai is also 512, I believe. But they're equal. Now, what in God's name kind of message do we get from that cursed Haman and blessed Mordechai are equal in numerical value? And what does it mean to see that one has to drink so much on Purim that he doesn't know the difference between cursed Haman and blessed Mordechai, and considering the numerical values? I want to say this. I told you before that great men are brought down by small things. I like the way you just said that. Great men are brought down by small things. Very well said. So it's recorded, so I can't take credit for it. Okay. Great men are brought down by small things. Mordechai, when he faces Haman, and he's told to bow down, and they'll kill him, he's, go ahead, kill me. I don't bow down because you have an idol hanging from around your neck, and I don't bow down to that. Bowing down to a human being is not just the same thing as bowing down to an idol. So he had an idol in front of him. What a tremendous, powerful thing. What an incredible thing. All right? It's so incredible. And yet, when Mordechai becomes prime minister, he loses the respect of some of his people. Because they said I don't want to say he sold out, I want to say, but he became so involved that he lost some of his purity of study. So Mordechai cannot be brought down or cannot have a dent in his armor by people who would want to kill him. But Mordechai can be dented by people who want to honor him. Okay? Great men are brought down by small things. David is the greatest facing Goliath. A lady taking a shower on a roof. That causes problems. Men who are powerful American leaders can keep the economy rolling. I had another word for it, but I don't think it's a good one. And yet, little things bring them down. So that's the Venahapachu, the opposite. Haman is the same way. Remember, we said we can find great things in Haman too. Haman comes from Amalek. Amalek comes from Esau, and we said Kabbalistically that Esau had the potential to be 400 times greater than Jacob, which is why the Romans surrounded the temple for 3 years, because they just, it always reminded them of what they could have been, but they weren't. I won't go into that at the moment. Haman has got the whole world bowing down to him. Haman from the Torah, where do we know? How do we know Haman from the Torah? It says, Hamin ha'etz, the letters, Hamin nun. Did you eat from the tree? I never told you this one? So Haman is in Hebrew, and God said, did you eat from? Hamin. So what in the world, because we have the word in the Torah, Hamin, what does that have to do with each other? Now let us see if there's anybody in here who can figure what God asking if they ate from the tree of life or the tree of knowledge, asking from the tree of life or from the tree of knowledge. God asking Adam that question has to do with Haman and Mordechai. I'll tell you. I'll tell you. Adam and Eve rule the world. They have everything, right? God says, don't eat from the one little tree over there. You have everything else. But what do they focus on? What do they become obsessed with? That little thing they can't have. Haman, the Persian Empire, during the time of Ahasuerus, was the 127 years, the largest empire in the world. Just conquered Babylon. And to be second to the king makes you the second most powerful man in the world. And everybody's bowing down to you. But no, one little Yidel Dalton, one little Jew in the corner won't bow down. What do you care? One little tree you can't have in the garden. What do you care? Now he becomes obsessed. And he says, Haman tells him all the wonderful things he had, all the great things he had. Right. Sometimes, and we talked about the whole concept of Hapachu. I know how we got onto it now, because we said when you go to a mourner's house, it throws you to the other side because of the balance concept. Now, that's what you were saying before, the idea of balance. You mentioned that, Barry, the idea of balance. In other words, if you're on one extreme, it's going to throw you the other so that you roll back to the middle to achieve balance. That's exactly the reason. Okay. Ki ha'oshek yeholel chocham. For exercising oppression makes a wise man mad, and bribery corrupts the heart. Because what happens? Holel means makes him wild. Holelus. And bribery corrupts the heart. The abedes lay, it destroys the heart. Matana, a gift, destroys the heart. You understand what we're saying here? In other words, total opposites. See, because what happens is that money can be used to destroy. Money can be used as bribery to destroy. And gifts and good things can destroy, destroy change the heart and destroy the heart. Tov acharis davar mereshiso. The end of something is better than the beginning. Tov erech ruach mikbar ruach. And better is the patient in spirit than the proud in spirit. In other words, it's like the whole idea here of, in other words, we are a youth culture. Something that is young, is new, is better. Something that has been around is not necessarily better. But he says that the thing that has been. What you were going to comment on that? Yeah. I mean, it leaves room for disagreement on what this.
No, I'm not disagreeing at all. When you begin something, you have tremendous expectations, but also some illusions. When something is finally done, you can look back on it, and again, it's almost like a liability. You know what's happened. Whereas when something is beginning, all this rush and enthusiasm, it might end disastrously. At least when something's finished, you know.
Very nice.
You rest more easily, actually.
Very nice.
Something than at the beginning.
Very nice. Very nice.
Patient in spirit and the proud. Isn't it saying that the humble spirit is something that's down to earth, like?
It's the idea of the tortoise and the hare. Right, the rabbit's proud is going to make it. It comes into and he's patient. In other words, a patience or consistency, working on something, is better than. In other words, he's taking on all the notions of society. Society's notion is, if it's new, it's better. Okay. If it's proud, it's out there. It's toot this horn is better. Patience is better. He's taking on all the basic notions of society. Now, there are a million different explanations for what he's talking about, or 70 anyway, according to the kind of sages. But the fact of the matter is that I'm taking it on, even on its face value, it has much to say. Where are we? Okay. Al tabayel baruchacha lechos. Don't hurry your spirit to become angry. Hikas b'chek ksilim yanuach. Because anger lies in the bosom of fools. I love that. Don't pop off the handle so fast because it'll be foolish. The idea here is patience. In other words, you can't let things get to you like to that point. There was a fool loses his temper right away. But now comes one which is very al tomar mashahoyo. Don't say on what was in the past. Al tomar mashahoyo mehoyo. What was this about? How was it? Shahayomim harishonim hayutovim me'ela. Don't say that the former days were better than these. All right, in my time it was much better. Don't say that the old times were better. Because you did not say this out of wisdom. Now, he's trying to say on a simple level that there were problems in the previous times as well. All right, not only were the old times better, the old times were not better. Number one, and number two, the other idea is that on the higher spiritual level, the idea is very simple that there's no such thing as time. Time doesn't exist. Did you know you're being born and living and everything's happening at the same time? And that your reincarnated state is in different dimensions? I like you better now than another dimension. It's ridiculous to say that, but I mean that's what's going on. That's what's happening.
You have that line that nothing became his life like his leaving it.
Now I want to Tova chochma im nachala. Wisdom is better than inheriting money. Yosel Leroy Hashemesh. Yes, preferable for those that see the sun. It's better. Ki b'tseil chochma b'tseil hakosef. B'tseil hakosef. Because under the shadow of wisdom, a man is equally well as under the shadow of money. In other words, ki b'tseil hachochma b'tseil hakosef. It's just as good to be wise as it is to be rich. So the question is, if you're so smart, why ain't you rich? They don't necessarily go together. Because he says, Lo lachachamim lechem, that the wise people don't have money. In other words, the greatest thing you can give a person in the concept of tzedakah and charity is there are levels of charity. Rambam gives levels of charity. One of the highest levels of charity you can give is that the giver does not know the receiver. What? The highest level you knew. So what is the highest level? The highest level is to teach a person a trade and let him fend for himself. That's the highest level. That's what you meant. Okay. So the idea is that people will take somebody's money and squander it. But if you give them wisdom and they know how to deal with it, then they're not going to squander it. All right. Continue for a short time. Keep it. All right. V'yisron das ha'chochma t'chaya ba'aleho. Keep it. Seil chochma v'seil kasef. It's better to be under the. A man is equally well protected under the shadow of wisdom as he is under the shadow of money. V'yisron das ha'chochma t'chaya ba'aleho. But for the superior excellency of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who possess it. The chaya also means it sustains a person. Wisdom will allow you to make a living. Wisdom will allow you to make a living. Okay. Now, Rei es Masei Elokim. Look at the work of God. Consider it in the work of God. Ki mi yuchal l'sakein es asher yifso. For who can make straight what he has made crooked? In other words, the idea behind this is if God sets up something like that, you can't change that. In other words, if he wants something to be a certain way, you can't change it. In other words, his will is the overall thing. You cannot change. You can't go up against what he does. It's a simple way of saying, if God wants it crooked, you can't straighten it out.
And why is he giving advice?
Because what he's saying is you have to know what's yours to do and what you can't change. All right. In other words, because you can't, because if it's God's will that something be this way, you're not going to be able to change it. You have to understand your place. You cannot take on what God wants. If it's the will of God, that's what's going to be. You can't change it. You can ask God to be merciful. You can ask God to change it. But if God wants certain things this way because his wisdom sees that it's necessary, you can't change it.
And that's part of the advice that he's giving. It's not that you'll be able to circumvent.
Right. And he's also saying what became the motto, I guess the motto of the Alcoholics Anonymous. God give me the ability to change what I can change, and the acceptance of what I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So, B'yom, here comes a famous sentence. B'yom tova hayeh b'tov. On the day of prosperity, be happy. B'yom ra rei gam es, and on the day of adversity, look on. All right, see it. Don't watch. Why? Gam es zel umas ze oso halokim. That's where the sentence comes from. This opposite that God created. All right, this God had made an equal measure with the other. All right, al divra shelo yimso hodam acharis ma'umah. To the end that man should not find the least to censure him. A man cannot complain against God. God said, I created this opposite that. In other words, there's a reason why this is this way. It is not a matter of left to chance. There is reasons for this. Balance is the ultimate one, creates the two, that this has to be this way. You can't have complaints to God. Don't try to change that. If God wants the will to be this way, if God makes it crooked, you accept it, okay? That doesn't mean you don't try your best to improve, but if certain things are this way, you have to say this is God's will and you have to accept it. And if you say, why am I getting the bad? Because on the day of good, enjoy the on the day of bad, understand that bad is a balance off of the good to get the ultimate. In other words, it's a balance. So survival in this world is based on balance. So if you had bad, they'll be good. That's the whole concept here of Zelu Umazeh, which is the concept of Kabbalah. Es hakol ro'isi b'mei hevli. I saw all this in my days of my foolishness. Yesh tzadik ovei v'tzidko. He said, there may be a righteous man that perishes in his righteousness. Yesh rasha marich bara'aso. And there is a wicked man that lives in his wicked. Why do bad things happen to good people? And tzadik v'ralo, the question of the righteous and evil things happen to him, and the question of evil people and good things happen to them. All right, this was the question that even Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses did not know why. There are answers to that, and in the next group, the next session, we will talk about why bad things happen to good people, and why good things happen to bad people. We'll talk about that concept because that's also a zelu umaseh. That's also the concept.
This is JMC, the Jewish Media Channel.